Hi everyone, my name's Sue Upton and I'm the author of Paper, Boats and Butterflies, Unfolding the Truth. I'd like to read a few pages to you over the next few weeks and I hope you enjoy it. Paper, Boats and Butterflies, Chapter 1, Paper Boat. Z89 stood in the centre of the stone cell, the cold slabs hard against her bare feet. In the gloom, her smoky eyes became aware of small movements in the shadowy corners of the room. A scratching and rustling to her right made her turn her head. Holding the breath, as something soft and warm slid over her feet, she folded her fingers into tight fists. Rats. She swallowed and breathed in deeply to calm her nerves. No weakness could be shown. That was unseemly. As the overhead lights became brighter, huge black spiders appeared, squeezing through the lightning-shaped cracks in the walls and stretching out their long articulated legs towards her. The girl forced herself to keep her eyes open and to stare at the huge seething mass before her. It won't be long now, she thought to herself. A rat with sharp, protruding teeth began making its way towards her. Then the others followed. Black and brown slivers of fur scratched their way menacingly across the stone floor and began to tear at her feet, her legs. The spiders whispered across the stone and tangled their sticky webs around her skinny body. Z89 tried to scream, but no sound came out. She started to kick at the horde of biting rodents, of the tangle of legs and hooked mouths of the arachnids, but to no avail. More followed. Biting, gnawing, scratching. "Please make them stop!" Her voice came now as a shout. Taking a deep breath, Z89 screamed, a shrill, painful sound that pierced the air. Then, as she felt she was going to pass out, the lights were slammed off. Z89 fell to the ground panting, her chest heaving for oxygen. Moments later, the stark white lights clicked back on. No rats, no spiders, just a girl in grey lying on a white tiled floor. Butterfly. Work always comes first. I hate you. Erin punctuated her final sentence with a slam of the front door. She stomped down the winding gravel driveway to the main gates and angrily pushed one open. They don't love me, she thought. They can't even be around for my 15th birthday. I'm a huge disappointment, and they don't care about me or anything I do. Erin rubbed her hand against her eyes, smudging the black eyeliner that adorned them. I will not cry. Rounding the corner of the road, she automatically glanced left and right, even though this was a cul-de-sac, and very few vehicles came this way, then crossed quickly. Ignoring the other select houses that also hugged the hill, where her family home looked out across the town, head firmly down, curtain of raven black hair protecting her, the young girl trudged on. Erin finally came to the end of the road and turned into the large field that lay ahead. Stopping and finally lifting her head, she breathed in deeply. Her safe place, the place of the 7 spirits. She stumbled through the long, wavy grasses towards a raised area where a flat, octagonal stone overlooked the more upright stones, standing as silent sentinels waiting. Clambering onto the rocky altar and drawing her knees tightly to her chest, Erin finally let out a huge sigh of relief. This was a special spot for her. She always felt calm here amongst the rocky remnants of outcasts from the medieval village that had once spread across the hillside. She too often endured being an outcast, an outsider. Here she could put things into perspective. Families, who'd have them, she thought to herself. She hadn't meant to say this thing, she said, but sometimes. Her mum had called out to her as she arrived home from school. "Good day, darling." Erin flung her bag against a fat grey sofa and threw herself onto the opposite, identical one. The softness of the cushions gave her comfort after another horrendous day at school. She slumped down after grabbing the remote, flicking through channels, ignoring her mum. The question floated in the air, unanswered, as Stella Winslow, a tall, attractive woman in her 40s with short bobbed hair, entered the large, comfortable lounge and leaned over to kiss her daughter. "So?" Stella asked, sitting gracefully down opposite Erin. She crossed her lean limbs elegantly and waited, drumming pointed pink nails on the side of the chair, staring across at her daughter and sighing deeply. "So what?" Erin asked. "How was school?" In answer, Erin rummaged in her pocket and threw a crumpled letter at her mother. Stella scanned the note. "Detention? Not again, darling. That's 3 times this term already." "I didn't know you were counting," Erin replied, frowning. Now, a few hours later, she rubbed her hands together to warm them against the cool air of the early evening. She didn't know how long she'd sat there. Time seemed to stop when she was here. The 7 spirits stood watching her, guarding the slight girl in the oversized black leather jacket. Erin had just grabbed what was nearest the door in her rush to leave the house and realised too late she had her brother Mal's jacket instead. She pulled the collar up against the cold and burrowed down into its warmth, voices and images from earlier whizzing around her head. The argument had flared once the detention letter struck the light of her mother's mood. Soon they were at loggerheads, and everything Erin had held tight in her head, all her pain, frustration and anger, came tumbling out. What had been a tiny flame burning inside her now became an enormous flare of frustration. Over dinner, nobody had spoken, until her dad and Malachi began discussing university and whether he was going to take maths or physics. Patrick then turned to Erin and innocently inquired how her maths exam had gone. Her poor dad didn't know he'd reignited the fire. Suddenly, Erin was shouting at him, and as her voice rose, so did his. Before she knew it, there were sparks flying between them all. Everything that had lain dormant in her mind now awoke. School was awful. She was trying so hard to improve, but she got distracted easily and then got into trouble. She was late for lessons and school in the morning, and now some of her friends were ignoring her too. As she stood to leave the family dinner table, she threw her final irritation and hurt at her parents and brother. Nobody cared about her. They only cared about themselves and Mal, the perfect son, the perfect student, and she was a huge disappointment to them all. "I can't believe you're going to be away for my birthday. You never miss good old Malachi's birthday, do you?" "No, of course not. He's your favourite. When do I come first?" Erin dramatically held her clenched fist against her chest at this point. Stella looked at her husband at this outburst, and Patrick glowered at his daughter. Erin continued, "No, he's perfect, isn't he? Never in trouble. Not like me. Well, I'm glad you'll be away. I hate you." Alone and cold, feeling sorry for herself, Erin now hugged her legs tightly. Her mum had threatened her with moving schools. Erin didn't want to move to St. Luke's, 10 miles away. She was happy where she was. If only Mum and Dad noticed when I did something well instead of just seeing all the mistakes I make. The watery sun slipped soundlessly towards the horizon over the tangled streets of the town. The orange-pink glow seemed higher and higher to become a watercolour painting. Erin sighed and took a photo with her phone. Perhaps she could use those colours in her next art piece. Suddenly a light flashed from behind one of the standing stones, and a gruff voice cried out, "I can see you." Erin jumped as she saw a ghostly apparition rise above the granite. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The apparition seemed to beckon to her, and she shrank back against the limestone altar stone. "Erin, come to me." The voice became even more shrill. "Come to me now." Then a hacking cough caused the apparition to double over, and the light rolled away. "Petra, is that you?" Erin peered again through the misty darkness, and now could make out a fluffy, bobble-hatted person in a dark coat. The figure stopped coughing and made their way towards Erin. "Spooked you, didn't I?" Petra said, flopping down next to Erin. "Hardly," exclaimed Erin. "I knew it was you by your ridiculous hat." She grabbed the pink bobble hat and pulled it over her friend's face. Inseparable since they were at school together, they had both been 4 and were delighted to find out they shared a birthday. The two girls were very different. Petra had blonde hair in contrast to Erin's black, and Petra could make anyone laugh, while Erin was always on a downer. But they complemented each other. Their interests were different too, karate and drawing for Erin, and dancing and science for Petra. Erin began to silently weep. "Hey, what's this?" Petra asked. "What is it now?" Erin's tears fell, and as they splashed down onto her jeans, Petra pulled her towards her. Gradually, Erin found the tears began to slow. Sniffing, she pulled a scrunched-up tissue from her jeans pocket. "Another argument," she stuttered, nasally. "It's no good. I'm no good. No one cares. I may as well top myself." Petra rubbed Erin's back. "You don't mean that." They'd gone through this so many times. Erin shared her thoughts with Petra like before. She always felt she never came up to the high expectations of her parents, always felt her brother, Malachi, was the favourite, and always felt second best. Erin explained that her parents thought she should concentrate on improving her grades in the important subjects and not follow her love for art and designing. "I don't know any more. Perhaps this time I do mean it. They might sit up and take notice if I did." Erin pulled at the tissue absent-mindedly, creating snowy flakes that the evening wind caught and blew away. She wished the wind could blow her cares away just as easily. "Hey, it's snowing up here," a voice floated towards them. "I wish it could be Christmas every day," sang another, the notes going low and then high. Other voices joined in then. As Erin and Petra looked over to the entrance of the field, shadowy figures began to materialise through the evening mist. "Happy Christmas, ho, ho, ho," shouted Roberto, one of the boys in the group, his long black leather-look coat dragging across the tall grass as he strode towards them. "It's February, you idiot." Petra's voice was full of smiles. Erin heard her friend laugh and found herself smiling as the rest of the crew arrived and flung themselves down on the dampening grass. "What are you doing out here?" Elsa, a moon-faced girl with the straightest, longest hair Erin had ever seen, asked. "It's freezing." She pulled her red woolen jacket tightly round her slightly plump body to emphasise her point. "Just passing the time of day," replied Petra. She glanced at Erin, who was already beginning to feel brighter. "What about you?" Nadir cleared his throat. "We're revising for our biology test by studying the human form in the natural setting of," he gestured wildly, "of the flora and fauna of the archetypal British countryside." His voice had taken on the accent of David Attenborough. Erin giggled as he walked over to her. "As you can see, this is the lesser spotted Erinitis Winslow bird, often observed in detention. Also, it follows the mating call of Shay of the Wild." At this, Erin punched him hard on the arm. Shay was a boy at school she had admired for a long time. "Yes, and if angered, she'll attack you forcefully and accurately with a few kicks and punches." Erin suppressed a giggle as she aimed the perfect karate kick at Nadir's head, stopping short by a few millimetres. "Lethal and deadly when riled." Nadir perched himself on one of the spirit rocks. He knew when to stop. Sitting hunched over, just like Gollum, he began to stare wildly around, slapping his lips together. He rubbed his hands and started laughing like a drain, before he was unceremoniously pushed off his throne by Rob. The others all burst out laughing as Nadir fell into a heap. "Where's Willow?" asked Petra. "Still doing her make-up," answered Rob, groaning. His girlfriend was never on time to anything. Again they laughed, as they all knew how much time their friend spent on looking just right. Erin was beginning to feel much better. They were a good group of friends who had been through a lot over the years since they all started at the local primary school. "Anyway, how's the show going, Nat?" Rob stretched himself out on the altar stone, his big brown Doc Martens dangling over one end. "What is it again?" "Shakespeare." "We're doing High School Musical, and I hate it." Nadir wanted to go to drama school, but much preferred plays to musical. He stood placing one hand on his hip and the other hand outstretched. "We should be doing Hamlet. To be or not to be, that is the question." The others applauded and called for more. Just as he was about to, Willow arrived. Her red, screw-curled hair shone in the street lights that were just coming on. Rob went to meet her and they walked back together, holding hands. Erin envied them. Would I ever be like that with Shay, she wondered. Looking around at the others, all of them chatting, for a moment she saw herself as a stranger standing outside looking in. Even when she was with her friends, she was always on the periphery of the group. That familiar ache came again to her chest of something missing from her life and a longing to be loved and accepted. Later, as she and Petra trudged home, after they'd all gone their separate ways, Erin thanked her friend for being there for her. She knew she needed to be strong now and go and apologise to everyone. Petra hugged her and turned in towards her house. She waved as she disappeared down the long driveway. The house looked cold and dark, apart from one single light glowing from her mother's study window as Erin let herself in. She kicked off her boots and crept up the stairs. The study door was slightly ajar, and Erin could hear her mum talking on the phone. "I don't know what to do with her," Erin heard her saying and realised she was being discussed here. She paused before knocking, holding her breath, afraid her mum would know she was eavesdropping. "I love her so much and I want to tell her, but it's forbidden. It's 2015. We've lasted for 15 years now. She deserves to know." Stella went quiet, obviously listening to the voice on the other end. Erin took in a sharp breath and sniffed. Stella spun round in her chair. "Erin, how long have you been there?" Putting the phone down, she went to lower her laptop in front of her, but Erin was too quick, and coming up to the desk, saw a picture of herself on the screen. She was sitting on a grey sofa in a pink dress, with her dark hair curled softly around her face. "Mum, that's an awful picture of me. What have you done to it? I never wear pink." Stella Winslow looked aghast at Erin's comments. "I know what you're up to," Erin said. "You do?" Stella raised her eyebrows and looked pointedly at her daughter. Erin laughed then. "You've been playing with the colour effects on the screen." Stella breathed out slowly. "Mum, I am not a sugar and spice and all things nice kind of girl. Stop trying to put me in pink." Erin stared at her mother. She realised she'd been crying. Her mascara streaked through her foundation. "I'm sorry, Mum. I didn't mean to upset you, and I'm sorry for my behaviour earlier." "Oh, Erin, I'm sorry too," Stella said as she rose quickly and hugged her daughter close. Erin knew she should be more appreciative. She lived in an amazing house, she had good friends, and yes, she admitted to herself her parents loved her just as much as her brother. They just weren't very good at showing it. Mum and Dad were always under a lot of pressure through their work. At times they seemed distant and uncaring, and yet there were good times, the many holidays abroad, the wonderful presents, the birthday parties, and then she remembered they would be away for this one. The same old worries began to cloud her thoughts again. "Mum, can I ask you something?" "Yes, what is it, darling?" Stella Winslow gently lifted some of the black veil of hair that had fallen across her daughter's face and hooked it behind a tiny, silver-studded ear. "Am I adopted?" Stella sighed. "No, Erin, you are not adopted. You're ours. I love you and always will, whatever happens." She pulled Erin close to her again. "I'm sorry we'll be away for your birthday, but we'll make it up to you. We could go to London for the day when we get back, perhaps. Do some shopping, see a show, go and eat at the Hard Rock Cafe. What do you think?" Erin nodded. "That'd be good. Thank you. I love you too, Mum." Erin wandered across to her bedroom and reflected on the phone conversation. Who had been on the phone? More importantly, though, what could be forbidden, and what did Mum want to tell me? Erin was determined to find out more.